name is Simone Booth. This is the Gilded Cloud podcast, and today I'm going to share my cancer story to date. For that, we need to go back to October 2016, so 9 years ago, and it's a week after my birthday. It's Monday morning, of course. Having just celebrated my birthday, I'm in really high spirits. It's been a great weekend. I've just gotten ready for work. I'm not in any real pain, so it's a good MS day as well. So I head off out to work, and it's barely a 10-minute walk. I get halfway and I collapse in the street. No warning, no heads up. I just collapse in the street. Now, luckily, someone was walking not too far behind me because it was a really quiet side road that I was on at the time. And the lady who saw me, she called the paramedics. When the gentleman got there, it was a paramedic on a motorbike, which is not much use at that point because it's not like I could just on the back and ride pillion off to the hospital. So he calls for a full-size ambulance, and in the meantime, I start to regain consciousness a bit and ask him to call my brother. Now, I was aware that my brother had only left the house for work about 10 minutes before me, and he drives. So, calls my brother. He spins around, meets us on the side of the road, gets there before the ambulance even gets there. And just like most little brothers, my younger brother can be a bit of a hemorrhoid, a pain in the butt. So what does he do? Takes his phone out and starts filming me. So I don't have to tell you how I felt when I collapsed. I don't have to explain to you what I look like. I can show you what I look like because I have that bit of footage. So as you can see, I wasn't panicked, I wasn't scared. I really wasn't that concerned because I didn't think it was going to be anything serious. Like I said, I'd completely blamed my MS. I just thought I've caught some kind of infection and that has led to me collapsing. They're going to take me to hospital, give me some antibiotics. I'll have a couple of days in bed and be absolutely fine. And I didn't think it was going to be anything more serious than that. So, I was still in pretty good spirits. I was more embarrassed than anything else. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was work. I was just thinking, I've got their really expensive laptop in my bag and a bunch of confidential information. So I made sure my brother locked that in the car straight away because I was like, I cannot be paying to buy work a new laptop because this goes walkabouts while I'm half conscious on the pavement. So life didn't flash before my eyes. There was no walking towards the light or any rubbish like that. What I was thinking at that point when I was actually going down was, thank God I got clean knickers on. Because if your mum's like my mum, when you were growing up, she was always saying to you, make sure you wear clean knickers in case you get run over. So we get to hospital and they run all the usual tests. They're monitoring my pulse rate and my blood pressure, and they do chest x-rays and an ECG, and they do a bunch of blood tests. And while we're waiting for the test results to come back, I grab my phone thinking, need to call mum, that kind of thing. And that's when I noticed what Brother Dearest has done with that video. He's put it in the family WhatsApp group. No comment, no suggestion of what's happened. He's just posted the video. And then when people are worried, asking what's happened, where's Simone, is she okay? He's just sending out a bunch of very, very random emojis because he's a younger brother and this is the kind of thing little brothers do. Like I said, they're hemorrhoids reincarnated as human beings. So I do a voice note just to let everyone know that I'm okay. I'm at the hospital. Once I know what's going on, I'll let them know what's going on. And then I look over to see that he's sitting there giggling, thinking that this is all hilarious, and I try not to throttle him in the background. So the doctors eventually come back with test results and they let me know that I have a hemoglobin level of 64. And I made the same kind of face that you're probably making right now. That, what does that mean? Face, kind of see? That emoji. Because I had no clue what the heck that even meant. And so the consultant explains to me that usually your hemoglobin level should be between 120 and 150. Mine at 64 is not good. So I'm going to have a blood transfusion. And again, I just thought, because that's got no relation to MS whatsoever. So now I'm shocked. Now I'm surprised. Now I am thinking, what the heck is going on with me? So I'm given 2 units of blood and I'm also admitted to hospital. I spent the next 8 days in hospital having a whole raft of different tests. I'm having more ECGs. I'm having MRIs and CAT scans and blood tests every day. And they're trying to work out what on earth's going on, and they're sure that I have internal bleeding somewhere. So I'm given an endoscopy, which is the camera down your throat. Very uncomfortable procedure, but yeah, I suck it up or swallow it down and have an endoscopy. When I eventually get discharged and go home, I'm sent a letter and I have to have a colonoscopy. And you guessed it, that's the camera up the other end. And again, very, very uncomfortable procedure. Didn't suck it up, but I sucked it up and had a colonoscopy as well. And at least that meant that they were able to rule out internal bleeding, because they seem to think I'd just forgotten to mention that I'd been hit by a truck, or, I don't know, pushed off the roof of a car park by some mobsters or something. But no, I didn't have internal bleeding. But it did mean we still didn't have a clue what was going on with me. And as time went on, I was still losing blood and kept collapsing and having to be rushed to hospital to have more blood transfusions. And that was happening like every fortnight or so. My blood levels would drop. The anemia would get so bad that I would just, as soon as I started moving around, I would end up collapsing and having to be rushed to hospital by ambulance and have these emergency blood transfusions. And we were getting no closer to working out what the heck was going on with me. So a few more months go by and we get to December. And I'm booked to go on a luxury holiday to an all-inclusive resorts in Jamaica with my family for Christmas and New Year's. I'm not missing that for love nor money or health or any other reason. So the doctors had tried to convince me to cancel the trip, and I didn't even contemplate it, to be quite honest. I told them I did, but in all honesty, I really didn't at all. And I remember a conversation with a very frustrated consultant, and he said to me, "If you fly, you will die." And in response to that, I said, well, my granddad always said, quicker dead, longer rest. So either you find a way to make it safe for me to fly, or I'll see you when I get back, because I'm not staying in this country while my family is sunning themselves for Christmas and New Year's. So he arranged for me to have 3 units of blood, and off I went on this holiday. Now, I will say, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have made that decision. It was really irresponsible, really stupid, and incredibly dangerous. And I really had put my life at risk by getting on that plane. And I didn't know. I didn't even have a diagnosis yet. But what I know now is that the issue would have been altitude sickness. Flying at high altitude when you are that severely anemic can lead to altitude sickness. So I wouldn't do that again, and certainly wouldn't recommend it. Listen to what your doctors say. If they say cancel your holiday, it's not worth your life. But either way, went to Jamaica, had an amazing time. The weather really makes a difference to my MS. So even though I was very ill, I wasn't as ill as I had been here, because I was in the Caribbean with that climate and taking on all of the benefits for my MS. But I was very weakened. I was aware that I was very ill. That didn't leave me. I knew I was coming back to a consultation to get my diagnosis, and I knew when I got back, I needed to get back to work. I was on statutory sick pay by that point, and that wasn't even enough to cover a month's rent. So I had to go back to work, and I was concerned about that because I knew I wasn't well enough to go back to work. So I get back to the UK, and 2 days after landing back, I go to the hospital, sit down with a consultant, and she lets me know, Miss Booth, you have multiple myeloma, and that is a blood cancer. So multiple myeloma, like I said, it's a blood cancer. It means that your body isn't able to make healthy plasma cells, and the plasma cells are what help you to have a healthy immune system. So I'm unable to fight infection. It also means that I'm dealing with things like headaches, muscle pain, bone pain, shortness of breath due to the severe anemia. Now, other than the anemia, those things all rang very true to me and sounded very familiar. Why? Because they're all symptoms of MS. Hence why I hadn't realised anything was wrong to contact my doctor before I collapsed that morning on the way to work. Because the symptoms of myeloma, so many of them are also symptoms of MS. She also had to let me know that myeloma has no cure, but she wasn't comfortable giving me a prognosis yet because there were some test results that they still needed to work through and work out what was going on. So I was going to need to come back to get a prognosis. So what that meant was I left that consultation that day and I didn't know if I was going to be around for another year, for a month, for a week. Would I even wake up the next morning? And that was truly terrifying. And I don't think I was scared because of my own mortality. I think my fear was sharing that with people. I'm not used to giving people bad news. I'm not used to being the bearer of bad news. I'm used to being the person that makes people smile, makes them happy, gives them good news, makes things better. Not being able to make things better made me feel physically sick. The other thing that was going through my mind was, I need milk. Like I said, I've been back from Jamaica for 2 days. I had nothing in the house. So I went off to Iceland's and I got milk and I got bread and I got eggs and I got in the queue and I burst into tears because that's when it truly hit me, the gravity of the diagnosis. In Iceland's, at the checkout, with the poor cashier trying to look anywhere but at this customer who's just burst into tears like it's the most expensive shopping trip ever. I did, however, know how to look after myself with this diagnosis much better than I did when I got the news about my MS. So I took my shopping, I went home and I had a good cry. That proper ugly crying when you got snot bubbles coming out your nose, and literally cried myself to sleep. I had a good nap, and then when I got up, I read the booklets and the leaflets the doctor had given me. I went online and did a bit more research just to get my head around what the heck it was I had, because until the doctor said it, I'd never even heard of multiple myeloma. I had no idea what the heck this cancer was. Once I'd kind of swatted up a bit on what I had, I got on the phone and started making the calls. The first call I had to make was actually to work, because the other thing I realised I was going to have to do was hand in my notice. I actually picked up the phone and tried to make that call a couple of times, and I just couldn't stop crying enough to even get any words out. So I ended up having to text my boss. Now, the painful thing about that was I wasn't texting some faceless employee in some massive HR department at some big organisation. We were a small charity, only a couple of staff, and we were a really tight-knit group. We were mates. I used to refer to my boss as my work dad because he wasn't just my boss. He was a friend, and he's a good friend, still is a good friend at that. So having to tell him by text was really difficult, but at the same time I also knew it was really time sensitive. I was due back to work the next morning and that wasn't going to be happening now. So then it was telling people like my parents, my brothers, my sisters, and it didn't take long before it just all got too much. Having to keep repeating the same thing over and over, hearing the shock over and over, not being able to say, but it's going to be okay, over and over, became too much really quickly. So speaking to my mum again, she took over that for me, and that actually was a huge help, and I was really grateful for that because I just couldn't say it again. And to be honest, after that, I think I just went back to sleep. I just wore myself out completely, just emotionally drained myself. So we moved forward about 6 weeks, and I'm back at the hospital for another meeting with a consultant to find out what was going on with those results that didn't quite make sense. And that's when she explains to me that I also have myelodysplasia syndrome, or MDS. Yes, a second cancer. And I just sat there and I listened to her. And I remember her saying, you seem quite stoic about this news. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm just absorbing what you're saying to me. But it wasn't at all. I wasn't being stoic. I was pissed. I was fuming. Absolutely livid. I just felt like I was the punchline to some really bad joke. First I have MS, then I have multiple myeloma. Now, weeks later, you're telling me I've got this MDS thing, another one I've never even heard of. So it just felt like the world was taking a mick out of me. I felt like some kind of hypochondriac, except this was actually happening. It was real. And I could just imagine people just thinking, she must be making it up. You can't possibly have all these conditions in the one body, in the one person. So I turned into a petulant teenager and was a bit of a stroppy kid for at least a day or so until I managed to just pull it together. And again, it was another one I had to look up. And I will give it to MDS. It's rare. It's incredibly rare. So fair enough that I'd not heard of this one either. But I did have a couple of days where I just felt really hard done, to be quite honest. And someone was just taking a mick at me. And I really did need to pull it together. So MDS, like I said, it's another blood cancer. But this one affects the red blood cells. So this was the most likely cause of my blood transfusion dependence. This would be the reason why I'd become so severely anemic that I was needing to have blood transfusions pretty much every fortnight. And at this point, they were still by emergency admission because it would just drop so low, I would collapse wherever I was. So we now have plasma cells and red blood cells, neither of which my body's able to produce enough healthy numbers or produce in healthy enough numbers to keep me going. And what are the symptoms of MDS? Fatigue, bone pain, muscle pain, headache. Are you seeing a pattern here? Yes. So here we go again. So I have 3 conditions: MS, multiple myeloma and MDS, and all 3 have a lot of very similar or the same. So most of the time, even to this day, 9 years on, a lot of the time when I am dealing with a symptom, I don't know which one of the conditions is causing it at any particular time. It could be all 3 of them at the same time. Who knows? May rolls along. So this is May 2017 we're talking about. And I start chemotherapy. Now, I actually feel like this is where my cancer journey really started, because I thought I was so clued in about cancer and chemo until I got cancer and had to have chemo. And I realised I knew nothing. So until then, I'd always thought that chemotherapy was like paracetamol. It was that one drug that anyone can take and it treats all cancers. That's what I thought. No. Chemotherapy is actually a cocktail of drugs. And the cocktail you have depends on a whole raft of different things. It depends on, starters, what cancer you have. Also, your age, your weight, what your health was like before you got sick. Do you have other conditions? All these things and a bunch of other things all play a role in the decision of what cocktail of drugs you are going to have, which will make up your chemotherapy and the treatment that you have to treat your cancer. There's also the length of time you can have chemo for. I thought you have your different rounds of chemo for 6 months and you're either cured and you start running marathons and climbing mountains, or you die. And I thought, that's it. I didn't know you can have cancer as a long-term condition. I didn't know cancer could be a chronic condition, especially considering that I have an incurable cancer. I just thought that meant the clock is ticking and your time is almost up. Not the case either. Yes, I know this isn't for everybody. Unfortunately, we still live in a world where cancer does kill a hell of a lot of people. But treatments have gotten so much better. There are a lot of cancers that used to be a death sentence that aren't for a lot of people or most people anymore. Breast cancer is one of those. There's so many new treatments for so many types of breast cancer now. A lot more people survive that than they used to. So I started my chemotherapy. And like I said, turns out you can have it for longer than 6 months. So I had chemotherapy for 5.5 years. In fact, I had 5 different types of chemotherapy over the next 5.5 years. I had a type of chemotherapy where I just had 2 rounds, so about 2 months. And I had another chemotherapy where I had 16 rounds, and that took 2.5 years to get through that. And the whole time I told myself, I'm good. This is light work. I could do this. But I was having to say that to myself to keep going, to make it light work, so that I did have this, because it was the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life, was going through chemotherapy. Chemo sucks balls. It's horrible. I had all of the normal symptoms that you will have all heard about. So I lost my hair, as you can see, but when it goes completely till you are completely bald. I had the vomiting and the nausea. I had constipation, which would turn into diarrhea. I lost my sense of taste. I'd also go off foods. So it was rough. But I also had things like weight gain. A lot of chemotherapy treatments come with a lot of steroids. And the steroids meant that over time, I ended up putting on over 5 stone in weight in total. So I more than doubled in size, weight-wise. And that didn't leave me feeling great. The changes in my body. I had things implanted, so they have what they call PICC lines. So the PICC line is kind of a fake vein, and it leaves 2 tubes coming out of your arm that they can use to give you medications or to take blood from, which protects your veins. But they leave scars. And I had several PICC lines over the years, so I have scars on both arms from those. I have what they call a port currently, a portacath, which again is another kind of fake or artificial artery that's been placed inside my chest. You can see the scar there. And that is what is currently being used to access my veins, to do things like take blood, give me various medications. And of course that has left a scar, and I can actually feel it under the skin there. It's hard. So that's a portacath, and that is there in my chest. And currently you are looking at what they actually look like. So that's my portacath, and that is where it is placed inside my chest. So, but with the scars and the weight gain, I wasn't feeling great, and it's a lot to go through. So depression, anxiety, they were issues during that time. They were very up and down, under control at the moment, I have to say, but I did struggle with both depression and anxiety during those times. I was medicated at various times, so there was that too. There was also the fact that I'd had to start using a mobility scooter, because between all 3 conditions, the MS and the 2 cancers, that had a massive impact on my mobility. Myeloma in particular affects the bone marrow in your shoulders, your back and your hips, and the pain can be truly unbearable. It could, if I was standing for too long, and I'm talking about the length of time it takes to brush your teeth, it would feel like my spine was crumbling, and I would physically start to double over and be unable to actually stand upright. And I carried on like that till December 2021. That's when I'd had enough. It broke me. I was done. The treatment wasn't working anymore. Anyway, it had started to plateau. So we were no longer able to keep the cancer down, keep it at bay, keep the numbers of cancer cells down in my body. And the side effects had just become too unbearable. So I spoke to my consultants and I withdrew from treatment. And I remember them saying that, to be honest, we've been so surprised you've lasted this long, because it's very common for patients to actually struggle with what they call treatment fatigue, where it all just becomes too much. So I withdrew from treatment, and that helped to reduce the number of appointments, reduce the number of tablets and injections. I still had to have the supportive therapies. They're keeping me alive. So I was still having to have fortnightly blood tests. And by that point, I was being treated by King's. I've been transferred to haematology department at King's, which is a specialist unit that deals with rare hematological conditions as well as other hematological conditions. And so I still had fortnightly blood tests, and they were literally booked in now. That stopped me collapsing in the street because it was making sure those blood levels stayed in the right range. By having it pre-booked in every fortnight, I'd have at least 2 units of blood. So I would go in on a Thursday, have a blood test. That way they'd know how much blood they needed to give me on the Friday. So stopping treatment did make me feel quite a bit better because I'm not dealing with the side effects of chemotherapy. So I no longer have diarrhea and constipation as regularly as I did before. I got my taste buds back, my appetite improved, the weight started to come off as soon as the treatment was actually out of my system. So it took about 6 weeks or so. The weight actually started to come off on its own because, like I said, that was pretty much caused by the steroids within the chemotherapy. My hair didn't start to grow back because, unfortunately, all that chemotherapy has left me with a form of alopecia. Like I said, I tried 5 different types of chemotherapy over those years. None of them had managed to even put me into remission or anywhere even near remission. We had looked at the idea of a bone marrow transplant on more than one occasion, and the different types of bone marrow transplant, which is the same as a stem cell transplant. So you can have that from your own cells or from a donor. And we'd looked at both options and neither were viable for me for one reason or another. Again, it's a way more complex procedure than you think from watching things like Grey's Anatomy, which was all I knew about these things until now. So that wasn't an option either. But I've always kept an eye out on what's happening in the research world, what's happening on the news, what new things are being developed, what's happening with Cancer UK and Myeloma UK and that kind of thing. And so I was aware of things like immunotherapies becoming a thing. I saw when the Indian Prime Minister got his Nobel Prize in Science, but it meant that I've always felt that within my lifetime, they are going to develop a treatment that can help me. Hopefully a cure that can cure my 2 cancers. And I've always felt that that's going to be the case. So again, I still wasn't particularly worried about my own mortality. I just think I've got too much to do and I'm way too busy for this to be it. So just keep going and something will happen. Just live in hope. And that's what I've been doing. So right up until last year, so October 2024, just over a year ago. And that's when my doctors came to me and told me that there is a new treatment and it's just been approved for use in England. And it was approved in June 2024 and it's called elranatamab. Now, I'm very proud that I managed to say that correctly the first time because I struggled to say that word, elranatamab. So this new wonder drug is one of the new immunotherapies. And that is a brand new concept, like I said. And this one has been developed specifically for myeloma patients. And it wasn't until October that they'd got the criteria. So it was available to myeloma patients who are at what they call 4th line treatment, which means you have to have at least tried 4 types of chemo. I was already at 5th line treatment, which meant that I meet the criteria to try this new treatment. It was also considered to be safer than a transplant, which has a number of quite high risk factors to it. Seemed to work quicker in the trial patients and have a shorter recovery time. So tick. When my consultant said, "Do you want to give it a try?" What do you think I said? Once I stopped laughing, because that did just make me burst out laughing, I said yes, very quickly. But things, they don't work that quickly. It doesn't work that fast. Before you start a treatment, you have to have a bunch of tests. They need to make sure that you are well enough to be able to withstand whatever treatment it is, and they need some kind of baseline data to help them to monitor whether it's working or not, or how well it's working, or whether they need to stop. So you have to do all those tests. And that could take a while, getting the appointments, that kind of thing. So we were all set for me to start in January. So just a couple of months later. And I was so excited. I was chomping at the bit. I couldn't wait to start until New Year's Eve. That's when I decided to get the worst case of laryngitis I've ever heard of in my life and be admitted to hospital. Now, with such a severe infection, of course, I couldn't start the treatment. I literally couldn't speak. I'm talking, I couldn't utter a word because all of the functions in my throat, in my neck, had all completely swollen up. It was so swollen closed that there were points where I couldn't get enough oxygen in and had to be given oxygen. So therefore couldn't drink, couldn't eat because I just couldn't get anything down, couldn't swallow medication. That all had to be by IV. I was on IV fluids because I couldn't eat or drink. It was bad. So I spent 2 weeks in hospital until that had cleared up enough that I could finally eat and drink incredibly small amount of very mushy food. So it was so rough and I felt so sorry for myself, but I lost a ton of weight, so I looked great. But I had to fully recover from that before we could start the treatment. So I didn't start until February. So February this year, just a few months ago, I started the new treatment. Now, with this treatment, the idea is that you spend 2 to 3 days in hospital and they wean you onto it a bit at a time. You can't just start taking this stuff. And then you come home and you carry on as an outpatient. There are side effects, just like with all of these treatments, and you go through the whole list in advance so you know what to look out for, that kind of thing. So I went in, started the treatment. I was excited about starting, and I didn't get any of the side effects. I got all the side effects. I also decided to get a staph infection, and that triggered an MS attack all at the same time, because I'm not basic in any way, shape or form. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to go in 100%. I'm going all the way. So I decided to get all 3 at the same time. So instead of spending 2 to 3 nights in hospital, I spent 2 weeks in hospital. My spleen doubled in size. I was completely off my food and my intestines are swollen up too. So with the swelling of my organs, it meant there wasn't enough space for my stomach. So my stomach was being squished. So it was like having a gastric band. So I would have half a slice of toast. That was a full meal and I was stuffed, and I would have to force myself to eat that much because I just couldn't get it down. There was no room for it. So in those 2 weeks, I lost another bunch of weight. So I came home a lot slimmer, but a lot healthier, because as sick as I had been, and I was really ill in hospital, the treatment had already started to work. Now, my doctors were very cautious about saying that at that time. They were like, look, it's too early. But I was like, I can feel it, I know it, and look at what my blood charts are saying. I was sure, but obviously they wanted to give it a bit more than 2 weeks before they started saying you're cured. So we carried on with the treatment as an outpatient, and the months rolled by and things were just getting better. My blood levels, my hemoglobin levels, my white blood cell counts, my blood going up and up and up and staying there. So my white cell counts got to a normal range and held at a normal range. This is the first time this had happened in 9 years. So where are we now? We're now in December 2026. I started this treatment in February 2026. I haven't needed a white cell boost, that's the GCSF injections, since March this year. I haven't had a blood transfusion since the same time, March this year. I've been walking unaided without my mobility scooter since May this year. That's the first time in 5 years since I've been able to get around without my mobility scooter. I'm feeling great. I'm back to pretty much the weight I was at before I started chemotherapy, and things are just looking very bright. And as of a couple of weeks ago, I can also say that not just a myeloma, but the MDS, so both cancers, are both in full remission. So it's been worth all of the being sick and diarrhea and trips to hospital and collapses and the pain and the weight gain and the anxiety and depression and sleepless nights have all been worth it to get to this point. So now when I'm up all night and I can't sleep, it's not because I'm worried about the future or paying bills or how I'm coping with a treatment. It's because I can't stop planning what's next. What trip am I going to take next? What am I going to visit? What video am I going to record next for you guys? What subjects are we going to cover? And I have a whole list of those. And I'm just so excited for the future now. I just can't wait and keep joining new clubs and starting new projects. And yeah, a lot of catching up to do. So I intend to do all of it. And I intend to share it all with you guys. So keep watching and like, subscribe, leave comments and let me know what you think or anything I've not talked about in terms of my cancer that you want to know about that I missed today. Put it in the comments. And if I don't answer in the comments, I'll put it in a video. So yeah, watch this space. And I hope you felt watching this was time well spent because I've enjoyed spending that time with you. And I look forward to talking to you all again very soon.